I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of Devex. We're back here at the Global Education and Skills Forum in Dubai. I'm with Caroline Riseboro, who is the Plan Canada CEO. Plan International, of course, is a huge global NGO. Plan Canada is the biggest of your offices around the world. And you're here, in part, talking about girls' education. So I thought we'd start there. You know, this is a conference on global ed. And when you think about girls' education, sometimes you go into a session and the focus is on refugees coming out of places like Syria. And sometimes we're talking about the need to know about artificial intelligence and all the latest technologies for this. How are you reconciling these things? What are you taking away from the conference so far?
Well, I think you've kind of touched on it. You know, how am I reconciling it? I'm finding it challenging to reconcile it. So on one hand, we're talking about the millions of girls out of school, particularly the girls that are facing crisis, facing conflict, and how do we provide them with even the most basic education? And then on the other hand, we're talking about the future and how AI is going to be transforming learning and education and life in general this morning. So it's hard to figure out how are we going to bridge these two when on one hand we're talking about a future which includes technology in a way like we've never seen before, but yet there are millions of girls around the world that don't even have access to the most basic of education and have never stepped a foot in a classroom.
At least in theory, these new technologies, the ed tech that's so much in discussion here, should facilitate the delivery of education to girls who don't have access today. Do you see that in any of your work on the ground? Are you seeing that in examples talked about here today?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our work on the ground, Plan has definitely been using more technology to be able to reach those that we don't want to see left behind, the most vulnerable. I think we need to continue that dialogue, and I hope that it continues past the few days that we've been talking about it here, because if we're doing it right, we will be able to use technology solutions to solve some of the issues we've been working on for years in this space.
Well, in particular, think about refugee crisis. Often education is the last thing that people focus on. I know that Plan in general has a big focus on girls. Tell us a bit about that picture. Are you able to get global funding in the levels you would need to actually deliver education in some of these difficult settings, especially for refugees?
Yeah. We would like to obviously see more. I mean, when you look at the envelope of humanitarian aid, only 2% of it goes to education. And we oftentimes see those levels declining, not increasing, and yet we have the largest number of refugees and internally displaced people that we've ever had since World War II. So I think we have to continue to work with donors to create policy that's actually looking at the interface between technology and some of the major gaps we have in the humanitarian space in education in particular.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Canada for a second, because Canada is one of the donor governments that has stepped up in a way, right? The relatively new policy under Prime Minister Trudeau is a feminist global development policy. That's the overall policy of the country is feminist. It's right in the name, which is a huge achievement and a big change. And a big focus on girls in particular. So what's happening in the Canada foreign aid situation? Give us an idea.
So, I mean, we were at Plan International Canada, especially pleased to see Trudeau and then Minister Bibeau championing girls and women and our new feminist international assistance policy. So it's fantastic. I think now what we're doing is trying to work to figure out how do we operationalize that? What does that look like on the ground? How do we actually reach the most vulnerable women? How do we empower girls to be able to have control over their education, their future, their bodies? We were particularly pleased a new budget was released a couple weeks back in Canada. We saw gender mentioned in the budget over 200 times, which was fantastic. And we were very pleased in particular to see an extra $2 billion over the next 5 years of new money to the ODA budget.
Yeah, significant increase after some time of kind of plateaued budgets and even down budgets in some years. That's a big change. What do you think it's going to translate into, especially thinking about, since we're talking about education here, girls' education? Do you have a sense that the Canadian government is going to be doing something new and different and bigger there?
So we know that education is a key part, girls' education in particular, of the Feminist International Assistance Policy. But as you may know, Canada is going to be hosting the G7 in June. We would really love to see Trudeau be able to champion girls' education, particularly for girls in crisis. Oftentimes the G7 has been a catalytic body to make movement on issues that have been stagnating, to remove barriers in particular. This is one. We see that girls in crisis are 2.5 times more likely to drop out of school, to be left behind, and then that cycle of poverty just continues. So we do believe this needs a global push. We have 75 million children that have been impacted right now because of crisis and conflict. Those girls in particular need to go to school. If not, we will just have another lost generation.
Yeah, that kind of urgency we're talking about, we know it's there, but it's hard to feel it sometimes at the global political level.
Exactly.
So one of the issues we're hearing a lot at this conference is, do we have the political capital to put these kinds of issues on the global agenda? Is your sense that with Canada in the presidency of the G7 this year, it can really be done?
We think it can be done and that it must be done. And the reality is that we have a prime minister who himself has declared that he is a feminist. He is also, and many people don't realize this, the first minister of youth. So here's an excellent opportunity to be able to bring those two issues together to create momentum on an issue that really has felt a certain amount of inertia over the last few years. So we think that there's no better issue for Trudeau to champion than girls in crisis and their education.
Okay, well, we'll be watching it at Devex and see what comes out of those meetings and those sessions. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much.